Our universe seems to be defined by a set of numbers which in some sense look special. If we had different numbers, we would end up with a sterile universe. People react to this seeming coincidence in a number of ways. You could say it's the outcome of some kind of design or providence. We could say it's a brute fact we have to accept, because these numbers might be determined by some theory which we haven't yet discovered.
Explanation number 2 is adopted by physicists, I think Steven Weinberg, who was quoted earlier in this conference. Steven Weinberg, Nobel Prize-winning physicist from Texas, I think his view is that we don't yet understand enough physics, and when we do, when we have the longed-for theory of everything, the TOE, we will then realize that these knobs are not for tuning. There is no freedom. There are no degrees of freedom. There's only one way for a universe to be. Having accepted the word of physicists that there is an element of fine-tuning, and I've tried to lay out 3 possible explanations. One would be God, which, as I've said, isn't an explanation at all. One would be the multiverse, and then anthropically, with hindsight, saying we have to be sitting in one of the universes that could give us. But the third one, which I've attributed to you, possibly wrongly, would be what I call the macho physicists, who say, well, it's just that we don't understand why these things are the way they are. One day we will, when we have a theory of everything, it will be understood. But it sounds from our conversation as though that I misrepresented you there.
I don't think one should underestimate the fix we're in, that in the end we will not be able to explain the world, that we will have some set of laws of nature. We will not be able to derive them on the ground simply of mathematical consistency, because we can already think of mathematically consistent laws that don't describe the world as we know it. And we will always be left with a question, why are the laws of nature what they are rather than some other laws? And I don't see any way out of that.
If you look at it, thirdly, if you look at a very strong form of this argument, maybe there's only one logically possible universe, to a theoretician especially, just seems obviously wrong. I've got a quote here from Paul Davies. I think the idea that there's only one universe is demonstrably wrong. You know, as a theoretical physicist, I find it rather easy to imagine alternative universes that are logically consistent and therefore equal contenders for reality. Now, it's just very, the idea that there's only one logically possible universe, I think is just obviously false. We can think of plenty of other logically consistent possibilities. Mm-hmm. So that, I think, is a problem. One of the great hopes for, point 4, one of the great hopes for, in this area is string theory. Maybe string theory is going to deal with all the constants in a self-consistent way. String theory, the hope is that you'll have string theory. It'll be the ultimate law of nature, and then from that we'll be able to predict what, you say, the mass of the proton is and what the strength of the strong force is, so that we think we can change these things, but we actually can't. Now, even if there are no other possibilities within string theory, there are certainly other possibilities to string theory, if that makes sense. Given that string theory, maybe there's only one set of laws of nature, but there are certainly alternatives to string theory. Mm-hmm. Another point especially about string theory, is even if the laws of nature have no free constants in them, it could still be the case that the solutions to those laws do. This is especially true of string theory. Even if there are no free parameters in the laws themselves, it's still the case that there are plenty of parameters in the solution. So instead of explaining the fine-tuning, all you've done is you've turned the fine-tuning of a parameter of the law into a fine-tuning of the parameter in the solution, which it is just shifting the problem around. It's not solving it.
And even more fundamentally, though, even if the theory is true, it doesn't do anything to explain why our universe has the constants and quantities that it does, because it permits this cosmic landscape of around 10 to the 500th power, different possible universes. And so it doesn't do anything to render physically necessary the particular constants and quantities that we observe. So you've got to conjoin your string theory with some kind of multiverse hypothesis in order to generate the many worlds in the landscape. But that then is assuming already that the multiverse exists. It's not a proof for the multiverse. It's based on the assumption that there is one.
String theory, he seems to be saying, has become this big metaphysical thing that has become mysterious and metaphysical, and it can explain anything and everything. Why was the kitchen so dirty? Well, it was string theory. You know.
Well, initially the hope was that it would explain the specific values of the fundamental forces of nature that we observe, and then it was discovered that far from doing that, it permits this vast landscape of different possible worlds governed by different values of the forces and constants of nature.
And finally, it would just be the mother of all coincidences if the only universe permitted by the laws of nature would also happen to permit intelligent life. There's a classic paper in 1979 by Bernard Carr and Martin Rees. Martin Rees is a name to keep in mind. He's written some good books on this. But they finish with this statement: even if all the apparent anthropic coincidences could be explained by a deeper physical law, it would still be remarkable that the relationships dictated by physical theory happened also to be those propitious for life.
Yeah, I think that's a sufficient answer for me. Thank you very much.
Hello. So this is kind of a poorly constructed and hastily constructed question, but with regard to the fine-tuning of the physical laws, it seems to me that when we look at like quantum electrodynamics or in quantum field theory, that a lot of the considered theories are just simply logically impossible. They lead to like infinities. And with regard to like the exclusion principle, which is derived from identical particles, that seems to be something that either is true or isn't true. 50-50, either we can tell certain particles apart or we can't. And so it seems that the fine-tuning may not be as finely tuned, and that in addition to that, far out theories on the physical laws may just be beyond our epistemic sphere, what we can know and discuss.
Okay, I want to just say about your laws, and I won't explain what quantum electrodynamics is for people, but what you're saying is sometimes there's constraints on what are coherent laws of physics. So what people had pursued in the past what they called grand unified theory, where the hope was just by kind of these kind of constraints you could get one sort of law structure that would yield everything else. But then, as Bernard Carr and Martin Rees have pointed out, is that it would still be completely amazing that just the law structure that was allowed by these constraints was such that the only structure was one that gave just the right value among 1 and 10 to the 10 to the 123rd power. It yielded that structure versus all the others. So you've just kicked the issue back one level to the law structure itself. Why that law structure would have to be enormously fine-tuned to entail just the right values for the constants.
Thank you.
But that might leave some people unsatisfied, because it still seems a bit uncanny that the only way for a universe to be is the way that eventually gave rise to us.